I would tell you that in the last 2 years, I've never been so proud to be part of a task force. And although it seems like things move slowly, I think that the work that's happened from this committee has uniquely positioned us to be able to provide citizens solutions. And I'm most appreciative to have worked with Mr. Brown and Mr. Vunich and Ms. Arnett and Dan and Travis and everybody else, because the work that they've afforded us to be able to be in a position to be able to prioritize locations, to ascribe costs to those locations, to be able to find not only hopefully public and other funding mechanisms to help assist infrastructure and private properties alike, to be able to work with things like the Land Learning Project, which is a unique opportunity that I hope we still embark upon as we move forward with certain areas. We certainly have, I think, some really great information. And for that, I'm most proud to be part of this committee that's at least embarked upon this over the past 2 years, really in uncharted waters in this committee. So with that, and with my continued gratitude to Rick Archesky as the co-chair and other members of this committee, I just want to say thank you. So with that, from the March 30th meeting, if there is a motion to approve the minutes. Made by Mr. Farmer, and a second. Made by Councilmember Rambo. All those in favor of the minutes, please say aye.
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 And any opposed? And any abstentions? One
Aye.
abstention, 2 abstentions, with Mr. Hopper and Ms. Holdhouse. Councilmember Hopper. Apologize. Okay. Well, the minutes have been approved. So, Mr. Newberry, do we have any public comment cards for this evening, or anyone that's currently on Zoom that would like to speak?
Mr. Chair, we did not receive that I'm aware of any written comments prior to tonight's meeting, but we do have a few with their hand up in attendee on Zoom. Mr. Gunther would be the first of those.
That sounds great, Mr. Gunther. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I would just like to say a few outgoing remarks tonight. And tonight, as you know, I speak as a citizen and as a former member of the Wildwood Erosion Task Force, having served on it for the last 2 years. I've learned a lot in these past 2 years. I've seen Wildwood streams and creeks firsthand with their dramatic stream bank erosion, properties lost and threatened infrastructure. Our understanding for the interconnectivity of our natural systems and man-made developments has grown. Stabilization needs to move forward while there's time, and that time is running out. And we know it will take millions of dollars to stabilize already damaged creek banks. We also discussed our city's watershed management practices and that we successfully installed a living wall in Cox Creek in 2004 to stabilize a creek bank near Strecker Road Bridge 17 years ago. I've also learned that there may be some resistance to embracing best practices. When I asked a while back at a previous meeting if best practices would be used, such as living walls, with work associated with bridge replacements over Wild Horse Creek, the response was, we'll try, not absolutely. That gives me great concern because of previous work in the creeks. As part of the Wildwood Erosion Task Force, I've also seen the devastation created with the Etherton Road Bridge replacement in Orville over Bonham Creek. Massive riprap was placed on previously vegetated creek banks. The riprap installed upstream of the bridge across the creek has now restricts the flow and thus speeds up the current. I was out there today to check it out. This has led to a mature tree and its 12-foot diameter root structures that used to stabilize the bank being washed out and moved downstream 250 feet east of the bridge and the length of a football field from its original location in the storm of August 8th, 2020. The design and implementation of this bridge is one of the most damaging projects since we incorporated. It is Wildwood's river to Pear and can now be seen on Google Earth to understand the extent of this project. It is efficient though. In one move, it ruined the ecology of the creek and the historic quality of Orville, which dates back to the 1860s. And moving the widened and elevated road into the front yard of the historic Orville School. At the headwaters of Bonham Creek, we see a proposed development which will drastically regrade and deforest the site alongside the creek. The city, we've also been told that the site will actually be better than in its natural state after all this regrading and deforestation. The city should not condone such developments. We should not add to the problems of the creeks. If we do, how can we in good conscience ask for funding for stream bank repairs? As the motto goes, first, do no harm. We've already seen this movie many times pre-incorporation. We know how it will turn out, and it's not good. I hope you all will continue to do good and help repair our natural stream systems. I hope our city will embrace the environmental principles and practices upon which it was founded. I hope our city will use best practices which have proven successful in our creeks and stop the MoDOT riprap approach. Dr. Remy, I want to thank you for all your years of service to our city. I wish you well and your family in the next chapter of your lives. I also agree with your plea for civility, which you noted on Monday evening. Unfortunately, after 2 years of service on this committee and 19 years before that, I have yet to be notified directly that I was being removed from this committee, much less hear a thank you, with the exception of Dr. Remy, you tonight. That speaks to basic civility, or at least professionalism, leadership, and a respect for citizens giving of their time to benefit the city they love. While it costs millions of dollars to repair our creeks, it doesn't cost 1 penny to say please and thank you. What will it cost to repair the damage caused by letting the citizens know they and their efforts are not appreciated or valued? Silence speaks volumes about our city. Unlike my experience, I will tell you all, thank you all for your service. Good luck moving forward. For the sake of our city and its citizens and our natural environment, I hope you are all successful. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Mr. Gunther. And I can only speak for myself to once again thank you for your service. It's been truly remarkable and appreciative from at least my perspective. Mr. Archeski, I think your hand is up. I'd love to hear from you as well.
Had to reconnect me. So again, yeah, reiterate what John said. It's been a pleasure to work with this task force. People on this task force are unrelenting. They will get the job done, even though it's a monumental task. And thank you, Dr. Remy, for all your support, and good luck to you and your family. Again, same situation as John. I did not resign. I was just not reappointed by the mayor. I was not contacted by the mayor or any of the council that told me that I was not being reappointed. I found out actually looking through the agenda and not seeing my name on as a reappointment. So I thank Joe and Travis for their continued work on all the committees. I know it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to put these together. So again, I'm not going to go into anything else. Most of the people at the council know what I had said the other night. And so wish you good luck, and I'll check in from time to time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Archeski, and once again, thank you for your service. It really is appreciated by this committee and by members of this committee, including myself. Are there any other public comment cards, Mr. Newberry?
There are a few others in attendance. If I could just give a brief instruction, if those in attendance would like to address the task force, now would be the time to use the raise hand feature or put it in the chat, and we can promote you to address the task force. Mr. Chair, if we could just give it a few moments.
Absolutely. One thing I did notice in this agenda, Mr. Vunich, is we don't have election of chairs or a chair.
That is true, sir.
It's probably my fault.
You're good at keeping a secret. And so a lot of what happened and transpired happened before Monday night. So I'm sure that we'll conclude tonight's meeting with you as chair. And then when the first item on the next agenda will be an election of chair or co-chairs.
Okay, perfect.
But
Sorry for that. I caused that snafu, and I fully recognize that. Okay, well, if we don't have any other speakers, so tonight we're going to have presentations by Ms. Holdhouse, who's going to talk a bit about the community awareness, her community awareness and public education endeavors. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the critical location priority matrix works that she and others have been working on. So with that, to be honest with you, most of the rest of the meeting will be in Ms. Holdhouse's hands. So I will relinquish the reins.
All righty. Well, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Are people seeing a slide that says why we can't ignore Wildwood watersheds?
Yep.
Yep. And I apologize, I'm traveling and not in my usual office setup, so I'm going to be reading a script from an iPad and looking back and forth and advancing slides. So this is hopefully a good recap of kind of content, not a good preview of what I hope would be the ultimate delivery when we get in front of community groups. So why we can't ignore Wildwood, and I should mention, this is a presentation that takes a lot of the pictures, a lot of the content out of Dr. Hammer's much longer and much more informative training that he did early on in this process. And what I've tried to do is, with the help of others and with a draft review from the education subcommittee, is take it down to something that's very much in layman's language, and that we could cover in a 10 to 15 minutes in a subdivision meeting, a ward meeting, Boy Scout meeting, anybody that wants us to come talk, just to start raising general awareness about our watersheds. So with that as and it actually turns out, I think with some of the changes in committee, it's probably a good opportunity to both recap and get the experience of the long-term members and filling any important gaps I've missed, and also maybe a good intro and level setting for the folks that are new to the committee. So with that, I will take it away for why we can't ignore Wildwood watersheds. Thank you for putting Wildwood watersheds on your agenda this evening. I believe this is a critical topic for our community. My goal is to help you understand why a citizen committee has been working for more than 2 years to address stormwater control and erosion problems. Since our time is limited, we'll end with where you can get more detailed information about the problems and where you can get involved in implementing solutions. Threats to infrastructure we all count on is one reason Wildwood can't ignore flooding and erosion in our creeks. There's a potential for dangerous road conditions. Flash floods in 2019 required school buses to retreat, motorists to abandon vehicles, and first responders to perform water rescues. Stormwater can be dangerous for anyone who uses our roads. When cleanups and repairs are required several times a year, it's expensive and inconvenient. The consultants working with Wildwood advise us that this is a time when an ounce of prevention can prevent a pound of cure. Infrastructure follows the creek banks. If you appreciate having the lights come on, clean water come out of the tap, and sanitary sewers to transport wastewater for treatment, then you should care about watershed flooding and erosion. Why we can't ignore Wildwood watersheds. Flooding has already damaged our neighbors' homes and threatened motorists. Stormwater has eroded backyards, decks, patios, and even houses are threatened. And as one of my wish lists from following tonight's meeting, anybody who's got pictures of what's going on in Evergreen and Evergreen Forest, that's kind of a gap in this presentation that I would like to fill. Why we can't ignore Wildwood watersheds, in case I haven't convinced you already. The problems are likely to escalate and will get more costly to repair if we delay actions. Local rainfall in recent years has been more intense. Cox Creek is near a tipping point, and small tributaries are creating gullies as beds of main channels drop down. Data from Chesterfield Airport in the top slide shows patterns of more intense rainfalls, 2 to 2+, 3+, 5-inch rainfalls in a day are becoming increasingly typical. The picture at the bottom is the Cox Creek Chippewa Meander northwest of Clayton and Strecker, the Clayton and Strecker intersection behind Anniversary Park and the Elegant Child. The banks are eroding towards Strecker Road. A single storm can carve the bank back 10+ feet. The loops of the meander slow the water down, but you can see how the bank is eroding on the downstream side of the first curve. If the creek breaks through that first peninsula, the water will instantly flow downstream faster and with more energy than it does now. Although the problems may not be in your backyard now, that can change over time, potentially dramatically. Here we start understanding what a healthy stream and watershed can look like compared to what some of our locations in Wildwood look like today. Weldwood has 8 watersheds and they have steep Ozark border slopes. Layers of soil have tremendous variety. Most of the 16,000 soil types found in Missouri are present within our boundaries. The result is a complex ecosystem. Forests were cut down and sites were graded when our homes and local businesses were built. The result is often land where water can't infiltrate the smeared clay that is just below the surface. If you've noticed it takes a lot of watering to keep your lawn green, it's because the water isn't absorbed and stored below the grass for the roots to absorb over time. When there's a storm, the water runs off quickly and ends up in our storm sewers and streams. The picture on the left is a healthy stream. In the picture on the right, the person in the red shirt is about 6 feet tall, and they're standing in a gully created by a tributary. This is not a main bed of any of the streams. This is a tributary flowing into it, and these gullies can extend back hundreds of feet from the main channel. This unhealthy creek has become disconnected from floodplains. Detention basins designed for conditions decades ago aren't effective. The natural safety valves to reduce the volume and energy of the water that reach the tributaries and the main channel aren't working. Unhealthy watersheds detract from the natural beauty of our environment and stress our ecosystem. Again, we have 2 pictures that sharply contrast. On the left, we see the beautiful hillsides that we all appreciate when the fall colors peak. One of those views that made many of us move to Wildwood to begin with. On the right, a stream bed has been eroded by the stormwater that flows down those steep slopes during all 4 seasons. This picture of erosion is typical of what you'll find in all the critical locations that have been identified by the Watershed Erosion Task Force with the assistance of homeowner reports, volunteer assessments, and expert consultant site visits. Creek banks 12 or more feet tall are not unusual. A person or a pet falling off the top of the bank could be seriously injured. Behind the person in the picture on the right, you can see where the water has cut into the bottom layer of bank materials. I'm always careful about what words I use when Dr. Hammer's on the call. The top layer of soil will eventually collapse, crushing whatever or whoever is in the creek bed below. The slump of the soil into the creek will also create an area of additional turbulence during the next storm. Think of a mixer blade going around and around in the water, and that will result in further erosion near that point. Wildwood Community Park is already compromised. Erosion has exposed roots, banks are undercut, some trees have already fallen into the creek. Without actions, more trees will fall, and obstructions created by fallen trees will be another factor that accelerates the damaging cycle of erosion. However, we can see that the erosion is not as bad as it is at the critical locations. The banks are not as steep. The stream bed has not dropped like we saw in the previous slide. Making relatively small investments in corrective actions in the watersheds west of Cox Creek can prevent critical locations from developing all over Wildwood. So the problems are large and they shouldn't be avoided. What's been done? Sorry, here while I sync my technology the old-fashioned way. We have adopted a planning and zoning matrix in 1995 to reduce the impact of development on watersheds. The matrix is based on the ability a site has to store water, which is a much more appropriate approach than most communities use. We pioneered innovative retention basin design, left corridors of trees and natural vegetation in place, and elevated outlets. In one case, the solution was so far ahead of its time that MSD required a performance bond. The approach was successful and has become an example of how to work with natural features. The Watershed Erosion Task Force was formed in 2019. This committee of council representatives and community volunteers has been meeting and working with consultants for almost 2 years to collect baseline data and prioritize critical locations. And here, one of the things I think it'd be maybe good to do would be include a Zoom snapshot of the committee in action. What's in progress? We currently have identified critical locations and scored them. However, the watersheds are dynamic and conditions can change dramatically after a single storm, so this will continue to be an ongoing effort. Our ability to address critical locations is constrained by laws governing spending public money to improve private property and the funds available in the city budget to address erosion and stormwater management. We have been networking with agencies and entities that can support our work: MSD, the USGS, Operation Clean Stream, land trusts, etc. So we're working hard to find partners that can solve these problems with us. And we have started work on a stormwater management plan. We want to do some updating on that and timeline and goals as this moves forward. As an aside for this presentation. One committee member, thank you, Richard, has led extensive work to find state agencies, federal agencies, grant programs, or other partners that could help fund watershed improvements. The committee has not found any promising leads after almost 1.5 years. What can you do? Learn more. Got a QR code there that will get you enrolled in the Watershed Erosion Task Force newsletter. There's also a form on that site to report any erosion concerns you have. And if you've enjoyed or found this, maybe not enjoy isn't the right word for something like this, indeed potentially a very scary subject. If you felt informed by this presentation, please feel free to invite us to speak to other groups you might be involved with. And finally, we hope you will commit to making our watersheds safe, healthy, and beautiful again. And the intent would be in a community situation that we would say, well, we'll take your questions, but since people like me that will be giving the presentations aren't necessarily experts, we'll plan on posting responses on the Wildwood Facebook page and creating a frequently asked questions page on the Wildwood website, Watershed Erosion Task Force. So with there, I will stop sharing my screen and come back to say, if certainly I don't think it's productive necessarily to talk about inconsistencies in my italics font or typos in the slides. If you have any feedback, certainly feel free to chat that or email it to me. But I am interested in whether we think we're close to ready for prime time. That if somebody called tomorrow and said this was the message they were going to get, folks could support that as an intro to the issues we're facing in Wildwood. I don't know if that takes a formal motion or is just a discussion or.
This is outstanding, Carol. I think someone just had their hand up. Mr. Farmer, Councilmember Farmer, excuse me. I'll get it right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Carol, I think it looks great. I mean, I think the biggest thing when any of us are really talking about this, but especially with a presentation like that, is we need to try to remember that the people that we're talking to, as we all were at one point here, are very much laymen when it comes to this. And so, kind of really, I think images are very powerful when it's like, this is what it should look like. This is what it does look like. Those are going to be obviously impactful to people, and then walking through the steps and where we're at. I think it's a great, certainly more than a great start. I think if somebody came and asked us to talk about this would be a great way to start that conversation, and just keeping it as simple as possible. We have the luxury of Dr. Hammer and his knowledge, but the truth is most people on the outside of our committee aren't going to care about every soil type that exists. They will understand that there's a 14-foot ledge of dirt that's about to fall in on something, and hopefully it's not part of their backyard. So I think keeping it very, very simple and clear for people. Katie and I talked about this at the council meeting the other night, kind of offline from everything else. Like, water bad, rain is happening a lot. This is going to crush things. That's all people need to know. The rest of it, the science is very interesting, certainly for us. And I've enjoyed very much learning all of that, but we're not going to have the opportunity to get people to be the level of expert we are. They just have to know that it's bad and it needs to be fixed quickly, because the longer we drag our feet on this, the more expensive this problem is going to become. So I think
Thank you, Council Member. Ms. Donaldson, I believe you had a comment.
Yes, that's really very well done, Carol. I've mentioned before, I'm married to an engineer and my son is an engineer, so you can get deep in the weeds really fast. And so it's, and that's one of my concerns is will people understand it? Just people who don't have that background. So it's nicely done.
Thank you.
Council Member Rambo.
Yeah, real quickly, Joe Farmer took most of my comments, but I do want to offer some pretty dramatic photos of threatened real estate,
Okay.
home, and a big field and yard area that's completely flooded, and you can see the water really cascading. But I also wanted to suggest perhaps you consider looking on YouTube and finding the news report that showed the cars getting washed off of Highway 109. It was on the national news. And I don't know if we had pictures of the poor horse that washed away, but we have,
And
go ahead.
my only concern about going to public sources is just rights to the material and that sort of thing. So the last thing I'd like to do is distract from our efforts by having one slide that somebody says, wait a minute, why does that say News 5 at the bottom and you didn't, get permission to use it? So
I think you can get
if you've got real
permission
estate things,
free.
that's great. But
Rob, why can't we put a horse in Mr. Berger's backyard and take a picture?
I don't see why we couldn't. I can borrow some shires from my neighbor. I'm not sure he'd like the application, but yeah, so I really, if need be, I can look into the legalities and so forth of that, because I think that's pretty dramatic video, and the fact that we made the national news might bring the point home that we really have a problem here that's worth consideration. That's all.
okay, well, and Joe has already sent me a link to the national article. If you've got some real estate pictures, maybe I'll just run that by the
yeah, I was going to add
city
to that,
attorney,
Carol,
or
most
I don't
news
think it's probably
organizations-
hard. My guess is it might not be hard to get permission from them to use that image for our purposes. So
I would say it wouldn't, especially if it has their logo. They're going to love it.
Yeah, it's really not. Most news organizations are fine with that as long as you just ask their basic permission. They're okay with it.
All right, after picking on you, Mr. Berger, you're next.
Thanks. So Carol, I was just going to, again, say my kudos. I think the talk track is good. It stays at a pretty high level, but provides enough detail to give the context. Of course, we have pictures that I'm happy to share with you. I've shared with other members. If I need to get in touch with you directly, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to clarify, and I do apologize, I feel like I'm still getting up to speed with ways of working on the committee. And what's the intent of, you mentioned, using this presentation and any opportunities that folks would be given to speak in. So just wanted to hear quickly if there was a high level of what was the ask for the development of these materials.
The original plan was to try to leverage residents who were already relatively had expressed some level of interest in being engaged in their community.
Okay.
So the thought was where there were ward meetings, which at one point were kind of, I think that this all started back before, a pandemic hit too. So I think the thought was, when people were gathering for ward meetings, when there were subdivision meetings, that, would piggyback off of reasons people were already there and people who were already interested enough to show up for some reason and talk about Wildwood and its issues. That's certainly something, it'll be a quality I wouldn't recommend necessarily post. It'll be recorded tonight. It wouldn't be hard to record it and post it somewhere, but the idea that you get in front of people and you have a face and you can kind of get some questions back from them was seen as a real plus. So we were,
Yeah.
so the ask is, if you know a subdivision is getting together, if you know, there's a ward meeting, if you know there's a whatever that would bring people together, I think we're ready to, to show up and be in a virtual or a live format and, start getting the word out there that, there are significant issues that need to be addressed.
Great. It just prompted a line of thought for me that we had discussed a little bit on this task force about generating interest and support for a potential ballot measure to be introduced. And a big part of the success of that measure would be educating the public. So I didn't know if we'd kind of started down the path of thinking about how we might do that. And this was
and there is a very real wall between what the mission of the education subcommittee can legally be at this point, and taking that all the way through advocating for anything that's on a ballot. So as particular measures would be put in front of the public, we could append to the end of this or add to our materials, whatever they might be, information on what was on the ballot. We are, there's a hard wall between us using any city resources to advocate for how people would vote on that.
Yep, understood.
Which is maybe a good segue into our next agenda item. If there's, I don't want to cut anybody off, but
Councilmember Galani, do you want to speak? I think you had your hand up next, and then I'm gonna, Ms. Holdhouse, for the next item, I'll probably give an update just basically where we're at with that, because things have changed a little bit since Monday.
okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I thought it was, as somebody who's new to the task force and a relative layman when it comes to watershed and erosion from a scientific level, I thought it was a very well done presentation, and it was very informative to me coming in, someone that is a resident of the city that isn't as well versed as you guys are on these issues. And I agree with Councilmember Rambo regarding dramatic pictures and things that people can relate to directly, that can allude to the problem. And I think Councilmember Farmer hit the nail on the head when it comes to water being bad. I think every homeowner out there has dealt with some form or faction of water being bad, whether it's a crack in their foundation or a pipe leaking or bursting or whatever it may be. So being able to see that this is not only a fluid but a progressive issue that's threatening areas all across the city, I think allowing people that might not be seeing it or dealing with it today to understand that it is a widespread issue and not just strictly localized. So but yeah, I mean the water being bad part is definitely a point that can hit home to everybody.
To your point, Councilmember Galani, Councilmember Dodwell posted in the chat, and 100% agree, because we've been saying this all along. And I quote, "While this may be not in your backyard, it will impact your ability to hike, bike, drive, and play in Wildwood," which I think is the take-home message. And from the outstanding work Ms. Holdhouse is presenting, I think that many of our citizens certainly will understand that erosion and our flooding problems in this city don't just impact a few people, it impacts everyone. And so until we actually really put work towards trying to mitigate some of these issues, everyone is going to potentially be affected. And so I think that that's an important thing. And then to Katie's point, how about speaking at PTO meetings, high school pep rallies? So Councilmember Dodwell has just volunteered to speak at a number of different meetings, so we should definitely get her involved with some of the educational endeavors. I appreciate that, Councilmember, and I think this is a great idea. So if there's nothing more on this topic, we'll move to the next. So the next up is research on Creve Coeur Prop C, Parks and Stormwater Tax Ballot Proposal. And this is on the agenda because at our previous our meeting for the Erosion Task Force, coupled with the Parks and Planning Committee, we sent to Council the ability to put on the November ballot a proposition in or a ballot measure to see about the potential for a stormwater and parks sales tax measure. At the last council meeting, our council, including myself, moved to postpone that for up to 3 months because we're looking at other alternative potential options that won't allow, that would obviate the need to put this on a ballot measure as a sales tax measure for the public. And that would include evaluation of potential use of resources through the Rescue Act. It'll include the possibility of maybe a bond measure or a SID or some other similar ideas. And so unless there's a need for us to talk about that, we might be able to just postpone that next aspect of this agenda and save it for as we get closer, if that's okay with everybody here. But in that stead, Mr. Vunich, one thing I would be remiss is, and I know you've got this on your list going forward, is for Evergreen. I know it's in relationship to just learning about other things. For the Evergreen area for Mr. Berger, and certainly for the Wildwood Meadows folks, I think that if we could maybe have a follow-up Zoom with their homeowners associations to talk about the land learning project, I think that a number of people are interested, and I think there's an opportunity where we may be able to get that off the ground even before some of these other funding mechanisms become moved to fruition.
Dr. Reppy, I concur with the slight delay regarding the discussion of the sales tax at City Council. I think we need to focus on other options, and Land Learning Foundation is one of them. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So if we could, I guess it's like the last thing I get to do. If we could put that on the agenda for the next person's chair, that would be great, if possible. All right, moving on to the critical locations priority matrix. Ms. Holdhouse, is that you or is that Dr. Hammer or Mr. Vunich?
I think that is me. And let me say, I'm going to say it now. I'll say it again in a minute or two. The item that came out with the agenda is a sample format only. So the data is not valid. There were just some placeholders where we were trying to show that another initiative of the education subcommittee right now is to try to take, you know, all the information that we've got about the critical locations we've identified and, you know, capture it in a way that makes it clear there are some consistent standards behind how things are being evaluated, and that ends up with some sort of visual that kind of makes the red, yellow, green, you know, sort of, again, a powerful visual rather than a table with, you know, numbers and rankings and things. So it's a work in progress. Dr. Hammer has been generously squeezing us into his few spare moments to work on getting definitions that would pass muster if we ever were using this not for public education, but for some sort of grant application process, that it would pass the muster of, you know, scientists who might get down into the weeds, as well as it would give a high level visual for people that would just say, here's what's going on. I actually, I didn't make it to the meeting last month, but when MSD talked about their, you know, they've got this scorecard and every project we goes into the same grinder, and, you know, here's what comes out, and it's, you know, it's objective and you know, fair, because they all, the same scorecard is used for all of them. So our goal is to get to something that, you know, will pass that test of this is objective, it's fair, it's clear. And I think presenting the locations with the criteria and the matrix also helps us, as this is a, you know, these are dynamic systems, and, you know, we could very well put something on the ballot, and between the time when it passed and we got the funding and we were starting to implement solutions, the list could have, you know, juggled because of some, you know, significant storm event. So I think laying that foundation of, you know, the scorecard doesn't change, but conditions may change, and therefore the list may move around is also helpful long term. So I will not, mainly because I can't actually load the spreadsheet and read it myself, get you into the details, but Dr. Ham and I are hoping to finish the definitions. And again, I think we've spent maybe sometimes a lot of time in the committee sort of, you know, talking about things, but, you know, we really have to say, here's what's important. And then I can't tell an unstable soil from a not stable soil bank. So I think we just have to agree, these are the things we should be looking at as a committee, which I think we've had lots of conversation and gotten to a very complete and comprehensive list. we need Dr. Hammer's help making sure the definitions will pass a test of experts who might be looking at it. And then we certainly need him to validate the scoring. So we will be back to you. We'd had what was probably an ambitious goal of finishing this for this month's meeting. We might have pushed, I don't think it was an ambitious goal. We might have pushed it over the finish line, but somebody whose efforts haven't been recognized yet is Teresa Clark, who was really instrumental in championing, not only having a great idea, but also raising her hand and very generously putting a lot of her time into, the work to get it done. So we thank her for that, and we'll be carrying on her work with the matrix and hope to have that finished by the next meeting. Any questions? Again, and I'm gonna say it again. It's in the title, but I should have put a big watermark on it or something that this is a draft for format only. It does not represent any sort of actual scoring of the projects. We're just trying to give the idea of how you would get red, yellow, green, and say now we understand why we're working on what we're working on.
I should have said, actually, Ms. Clark, very appreciative of her efforts on this task force, and sad to see that she cycled off as well. One thing I might add, if possible, so Mr. Vunic, with the acceptance on Monday of our consultant to ascribe costs to some of these projects, it may be one consideration to just also have the cost in here, and then then based off the cost, maybe a realistic assessment on based off cost, if it's something that we could we'd be able to tackle with available budgetary items, maybe could be also helpful, because it could move something to a higher priority if there may be budget to tackle.
Yes, yeah, and there is a if you get into the fine print, and I think we may try to roll some of these up into like cost, and then one of them is on is how complex is the ownership of the land? Would it have to be a coordinated project with 18 entities or not? So we may roll some of them together, but yes, cost and some of the factors that would make it take either longer because of a more complex permitting process, or require a lot more effort from city staff and to coordinate with other entities, that there'll be a way that will be included in this as well.
Great. Any questions for Ms. Holdhouse, Mr. Vunic, or Dr. Hammer specifically on the matrix development? All right, fantastic. Okay, next up, we're looking at item D, focused and balanced approach, creek beds, banks, borders, and beyond, the BBB. I like it.
Did you get the beds, borders, and beyond? Yeah, I've been playing with word trios, and I finally went, yeah, beds, borders, and beyond might actually stick. So, but whether that ends up being the catchphrase or not, I think some of what I've been struggling with, personally, as well as how would I, go forth to somebody and say, yeah, there's this thing on the ballot, and I wouldn't be doing this wearing my hat as a member of the Watershed Erosion Task Force, but as a private citizen or somebody serving on a committee that was tasked with, getting people to support it. The challenge for me has been, we've been focused on a lot on, the critical locations and the areas that are badly damaged and, definitely threatening infrastructure as well as health and safety and need to be addressed. But, we're not going to mitigate and repair our way out of this. So I think, we've been trying to move things forward and not lose focus. But I think we have to, think about balancing that with, thinking about what are we going to do at the, the borders of the streams to make the, to address detention basins that aren't doing what they need to do anymore, and connecting the creeks to planned floodplains rather than the ones they'll find for themselves. So, kind of moving beyond the beds and the banks to the borders and the things we need to be doing along the streams. And then, there's been a lot of brainstorming, a lot of great ideas have come to me, in terms of community education about, we should be teaching people about rain gardens and about rain barrels and about pervious pavements. And there's all sorts of great things that we ought to be doing, and engaging our entire community in, to, retain the stormwater at its source. But again, I think we have to balance that. There's a lot of great ideas, but we need to stay. I think if we're going out to the public and saying, we need to spend money on repairs, we also need to have pieces that are addressing the root causes and that are proactive about keeping, the next bank from getting to be a critical location. So, I think that maybe we need to, and Dr. Hammer has a couple of ideas on, and, that would address the areas where we're truly at that point where an ounce of prevention may be worth a pound of cure down the road. And so looking at the community parks and some of the things that maybe wouldn't be big ticket items, but that as people say, hey, what are you doing to prevent future problems? We say, here's what we're doing. And we also, as we start looking at what geographical areas and what wards they're in, there would be stuff going on over a wider geographic area. So, my thought is that we need, in addition to, criteria and scoring of critical locations, we need to start looking at, which, if we had one public service campaign we could do next year, should it be rain barrels or should it be, mulch your grass? Or don't throw your leaves in the creek or whatever. So prioritizing that kind of, those ideas, and then really starting to look at what detention basins and flood, work with connecting creeks to floodplains might make a near, because the system-wide things are going to be very long-term results. The critical locations we're not going to get immediately because they're going to be expensive to fix. So it's really those border areas, I think, where we could start making some progress in the near term. And I think if we're, it's always good to be able to, if that last slide that had, or, where we saw what have we already done, could have a few more of those things in progress, I think it would help our efforts in the community.
Excellent.
So that's if Carol could wave her magic wand and have anything she wanted, that's the sort of things I would put on our agendas going forward. And I'm going to go turn on some lights because the sun is setting here in Florida. I see that I'm getting progressively more owl looking and darker. So I will.
All right. Well, I think that's outstanding. Any questions for Ms. Holdhouse? Okay, Carol, that was outstanding. Phenomenal work, really. Thank you so much for all of that, and look forward to seeing what the next meeting looks like. This is great. So next up is scope of servicing and contractual matters with consultants. Mr. Bunich, I believe that's you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the task force, there are a couple of items that have been provided to you as part of tonight's packet for your consideration. One is a contract that was orchestrated by the Department of Planning and Parks with a firm called Wilson Hydro. It's an individual, Joe Wilson, and then a sub-consultant working in conjunction with Mr. Wilson, Todd Wagner. They are two PEs that have extensive experience in stormwater management facilities, as well as the dynamic fluvial environments of the Ozarks and Ozark Plateau. They have been engaged by the City Council to assist in creating the cost estimates that the task force will need, as well as the City Council, to basically sell the program. Without those cost estimates, we'll never be able to know the scale of what we can or cannot do. And certainly when people are asked to either accept the tax or support a bond issuance, they'll want to know how much does it all cost and where it all is going. And so this particular item, the cost estimates has been on the task force lips and been spoken about for a while, and that work has begun. So tonight, the department is providing you the contract plus the scope of services that was provided to City Council on Monday night. I'll defer questions because the next item relates to the United States Geological Survey, and I'm going to ask Dan Ron, our Assistant City Engineer, to kind of help on this one. I'm just going to give a brief background. As you know, at the start of 2021, Mr. Ron was able to engage an individual from the United States Geological Services offices in Rolla, Missouri. Mr. Inland attended a meeting and I think did an excellent job of kind of saying they're there to help and they'd like to think this might be a project they could undertake. And so Mr. Ron received a proposal from the USGS last week. And so we wanted to get it to you tonight so you can start looking at what they're proposing in terms of the services, the products that will come from those services and the time frame. And with that, and your permission, Mr. Chair, I'd like to defer to our Assistant City Engineer. Thank you.
Oh, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Joe and Chair Remy. Yeah, so I will say you grab a cup of coffee before you read that. It's a pretty dense scope of work. There's a lot to it, but it is really, in my opinion, it's really great. USGS provides this service where we can partner with them to collect data and analyze data and do a cost share. And so their proposal includes putting some monitoring technology in the stream in several locations that will monitor the water level and I think the stream velocity, things like that. It includes a LiDAR survey of probably of the whole city of Wildwood. That's actually something that they have found through the NRCS is planning on doing an aerial LiDAR in this fall. So they're going to use that data. And they also propose to use what's called terrestrial LiDAR, or basically just like ground-based surveying to scan certain sections of creeks so that we can watch, or so we can monitor through the year 3 or 4 times what's going on in specific locations. So, you know, basically what you're seeing or what you'll read through is a scope of work, and with that, it's a 2-year proposal to collect and analyze the data, which is pretty typical especially for collecting stream flow and that kind of thing. You know, we need a significant data set in order to analyze it, you know, appropriately, to figure out, you know, when we get this kind of rainfall, this is what happens in the creek and things like that. So then what USGS will do is analyze that data as well by creating some models that include modeling of the streams when they flood, and they also have proposals. Or part of the scope there is to analyze future build out in the city. So if we can use our zoning maps and our future land use maps and say, okay, we know this area here is, you know, potentially develop residential over the next X amount of years, and then we can build that into the model and see how it affects. And so we can essentially plan, which is what we want to do, for you know, how the future development will affect the stream. So there's a lot of, and with that, basically what they have not given us a cost proposal yet. That's going to come in the next couple of weeks. I'm not exactly sure how that works with the federal government, but they have some bureaucracy that they have to work through before they can give us a final price. So, but generally speaking, it is I think a really great opportunity for us to, you know, basically we're going to be looking at something probably a little in the range of a 50-50 cost share with USGS. And so we're going to be able to collect a lot of really good sound data. The other thing that USGS does is they are, you know, sticklers on making sure that data is verified and that it is compatible with for use in other models and things like that. So it's a really great opportunity, and I hope that once we see the pricing and we get all of that in line, we'll be able to take that on. So anyway, if anyone has any questions about that, it is a very dense document. I've read through it a couple of times. If anyone has any questions, feel free to email me or call me. I can answer any questions there. And if I can refer to Paul Ridland, and he can definitely answer them. So thank you very much.
Questions for Mr. Ron or Mr. Vunich?
Dr. Remy, if I could just add a couple of points.
Yes, sir.
One of the items that is in the proposal that Dr. Hammer and others have been asking for almost since the inception of the task force is that LiDAR data and information. So I think a real key component of this particular proposal from the USGS is the fact that they are going to provide that finally, both from an aerial and terrestrial standpoints. So that's a real positive. Also, if you dig into the details, one of the items they note under relevance and benefits is an analysis or evaluation of the adequacy of the compensatory storage that exists along Cox Creek. And I take that to mean that, do we have facilities that actually work in terms of holding the water or retaining the water? And I think that's going to be very interesting for us, and certainly goes along with one of our 9 priority projects, which is to retrofit. So a lot of good stuff in the proposal, and thank you for allowing me to just make a couple more comments.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Just out of curiosity, based off the consultants, did they give us a time frame when they think they're going to be able to ascribe costs to these projects?
They actually were doing a lot of the preliminary work. And if you haven't noticed, Jeff Rippey from the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District is on tonight. And he has just been instrumental in getting them the information, both Mr. Wilson and Mr. Wagner, that they requested, so they can begin that basis, that foundation of understanding the cost components. And Mr. Rippey was kind enough to even share their methodology they use, so to speak, when assessing projects and the cost associated with them. So MSD has really kind of opened the door and been a good partner, and we really appreciate it from them.
Jeff,
So
thank you very much for all that. We're really excited about that partnership.
So it's underway, and I'm hoping, if at all possible, to have at least 2 or 3 of the cost estimates by the next meeting, so we can start understanding what we're looking at.
Jeff, is that the view behind Mr. Berger's house when the sharks are up on after a big storm like today?
You know, so I couldn't see that view before I just turned it on, and I was a little surprised by what it picked for me. So I think that's from the aquarium at Union Station. My daughters and I were there about a year ago, or just pre-pandemic.
Well, last meeting, you guys, both you and your colleagues said that you were looking forward to partner, and I think your presence on this meeting and the work that you're doing with our consultants speaks volumes, and we're appreciative to move forward in that manner. Thank you.
Certainly. Nope. Any way we can help.
Any questions on this topic? Okay. Well, let's see. With that, if it's okay, we've already talked through some of the subcommittees. My suspicion is that with election of a chair or co-chairs, that the committees may be reformatted to perhaps in a different perspective. So with that, I think we'll move to other matters for consideration, unless there's anything additional from the Stormwater Master Plan Ordinance Review Committee or anything further from Ms. Holdhouse. Okay. So Mr. Vunich, do you want to talk about some of the major milestones? This is a wonderful document.
Well, thank you, Dr. Remy. And Dr. Remy and members of the task force, the timing probably is important from 2 standpoints. First, we are entering our 3rd year of existence, and certainly after 2 years, some of you may have a little bit of task force weariness and think, what have we accomplished? And then secondly, we have a number of new members on the task force. So maybe it'll give them the shot in the arm to know that we're making progress in a lot of different ways. Certainly over the course of time, we've not done a major project. We've not corrected a erosion area. We've not necessarily built something out there that people can go see. But as the memorandum indicates, we have been very successful. And I think the one thing that came out of Ms. Holdhouse's presentation that's not part of the list, which I will not recite tonight, I'll let you ask any questions, is the fact that the discussion of watershed erosion and our watersheds, I'm hearing it more and more from our residents now, that people are starting to kind of click in and say, oh, that's what that is, or I was wondering what was happening there. Yeah, I experienced that with the last major storm event. And so if at all possible, I really think that what you've all accomplished, although it's not like in, let's say, a project, we've really raised the awareness in the community. And I think we're building support for what we're trying to do. And that is to better manage our natural resource base and address stormwater erosion at its source, not when it's in the creek and there's little to do. So I thought it was just an opportune time at the anniversary to provide you the list of things we've accomplished. And I salute you for all of them, I truly do. Even from, the standpoint of Mr. Sturman's tireless work of being told, no, there's no money, and coming back for more and more and more. So it's a good group, and I just wanted to let you know you've done a good job. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. And for historical perspective, for those that are new to this committee. So for the first couple of months of this committee, a number of us had worked on our different aspects of different committees that we were, of subcommittees. And Richard Sturman, second to none. If you could imagine a roll of paper towels, that's how many times he's gone around this world trying to find funding for us. So, I mean, and he would have spreadsheet after spreadsheet, and his work was truly remarkable. Although he never really had great news to tell us. So he worked so hard and just couldn't get there. But it was really a testament to his hard work, and really appreciative. Councilmember Rambo, your hand is up.
Yes, I think if you Google dogged determination, his picture comes up. But I actually wanted to say that it was striking to me to see the public comments for the reserve discussion that came in. There were probably, half a dozen, maybe 10 or something like that. And every last one of them talked about the erosion implications. So we're making a difference. I don't think that would have happened even 1 year ago, and certainly not 3 years ago. So we're, this whole issue is gaining traction. And I just wanted to say that to reinforce Joe's encouragement. We're making a difference, and we're kind of at the blast off point right now. So that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Berger, did you have a comment? I think you're gonna volunteer for something.
No, I just said I would happily, be a proof point to Mr. Vunich's point that we don't have a ton of physical evidence of the efficacy of the task force. I'd love to help get one of those in place, and I would happily demonstrate that to the community on our property if we get the opportunity.
Perfect.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Councilmember Farmer, your hand is up.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right time. I got on a minute or two from the beginning, so I'm not sure if this was mentioned or not, but I did want to take an opportunity to just kind of express my gratitude towards everybody that had been on the committee and is now not, and especially obviously to you, Ken, as you're moving forward. I think, for those of you that are new on this committee or any committee or new to the council, it is a rare thing to have a goal that everybody seems to be very much unified in working towards, and to work in a complicated issue with a great deal of efficiency. I think, Ken, you and Rick have done an amazing job of steering this thing to where it needs to go. And I'm excited to work with the rest of you guys as we move forward. I think, everybody's comments, Rob, I was thinking the same thing. More of those comments about the reserve dealt with the watershed, I think, than anything. And I mean, when I got on this thing, whatever it was now, a year and a half ago, most people I talked to didn't even know we had a watershed. So this has gone quickly. It's some big steps. We've got some big stuff coming forward, but I'm excited to see where this thing goes. And I can't thank enough Mr. Archeski and Mr. Gunther for everything they've done. And then obviously, Ken, it's a big loss for all of us with you stepping away from the council on this. But hopefully we'll be able to bring this thing home for all of you guys. I think that's what everybody wants to do here. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Farmer. So with that, I think we're at the end of the agenda. I think I just have a couple more comments and I'll let you go. And we were able to get this meeting in an hour and 15 minutes or less. So I just want to say a couple things. So for those that don't know, so when I ran for council, it was because of erosion issues. I had poured through a lot of emails that Mr. Bunich and Dr. Hammer back in the early 2000s had sent back and forth with one another. And it actually was the impetus by which I ran for council. And I said to the mayor, I said, if I win, I'm going to start some sort of task force to see if we could tackle these problems. And at the time, it was like, well, maybe we'll see if anybody's really interested in it. And, we found 16 council members that were unified that this was a problem, and the support from council members past and present and the support from city members really was phenomenal. This quote from Kim Harrison that says, endings are not always bad. Most times they're just beginnings in disguise. For me personally, it's sad to leave you all, but it's wonderful to see the new adventures that my family and I are going to face. But it's also uniquely wonderful to see the wonderful leadership that's going to come out of that next meeting when a new chair or chairs gets elected. And that this task force that really was something so passionate that I felt that was needed for this city, to see the direction that all of you are going to take this in so that we can find meaningful solutions for our citizens. And I really do think that in disguise, the new beginnings at this task force, from all the great work that's been done and the work that will be done, is really something that I treasure. And I look forward to watching you guys on Zoom from afar, so that someday I'll come back and I get to see all of the wonderful watersheds that are currently in place, with bridges that are restored to their health. And I could sit on the patio with Mr. Berger and we can have a drink. And I look forward to that in his backyard. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you guys in the future. So with that, I will take a motion for adjournment. Made by Councilmember Galani, seconded by Ms. Holdhouse. Non-debatable. All in favor, please say aye.
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 None opposed? No abstains? With that, our meeting is over, and good luck, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
Night, everyone.
Nicely done, Dr. Remy.